Hello and welcome to the Situation Report today. Very glad to have you joining the conversation. My name is Jeremy Stolniker. I am your host. And as I say just about every episode, this is the show where we do our best to give you the information and perspectives you need to navigate an ever-changing culture. And that's not just a tagline. It's something that I believe that this show should be. This should be a place that you can come to and get information as well as perspectives to really see clearly what's happening in our culture and then to navigate it. I think one of the big issues in our culture, this is American culture, I'm sure this is happening around the world, but I know it's happening here, is the issue of education. So many of the other issues, the gender issues, and we've talked about critical race theory, so many of these other issues that are happening in our culture that are driving our culture, both left and right, have connecting points in our education system. This is not news to anyone, but if you want these agendas, whatever your agenda is, to really take root in a culture, then you need to get to the kids. We have long talked about what's happening in our secondary education system and our institutions of higher learning, but we see this so clearly right now happening even in our K through 12 schools. Understanding education, really having the right perspective on what is happening, what's not happening. And then as a parent who cares about my kids growing up in a healthy way, being able to live out what God's called them to do, understanding where we should have them educated or how we should educate them. These are all big questions that have huge cultural implications. And I'm very glad today to be able to have on someone who knows and understands these issues. He's on the front lines. Dr. Ben Merkle is with us today. And Dr. Merkle, you'll hear his story. He'll tell it a little bit in this interview, but he is currently the president of New St. Andrews College in Idaho. He has a deep personal educational background to include a PhD from Oxford University. He'll talk about kind of the various things he's done personally in education. But he understands this. He has kids. He's raised kids. He is the president of a college where he seeks to educate young people. What a great perspective he has. I've said this, or I'll say this a couple times in the interview that you're about to hear. One of the things I really appreciate about Dr. Merkle is he looks at things through a very balanced lens. He sees things as they are, particularly as it relates to education, and he can see them as they are while also prescribing the best steps for Christian parents to take as they do their best to raise up their kids. So grateful to be able to have him on today to talk about these issues, and I trust that this interview will be a help to you. Dr. Merkle, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much for having me. Love to be here.
It's awesome to talk to you again. I think we met probably 3 years ago or something like that. And
Sounds about right.
We have a lot of things in common, a lot of friends in common. Both served in the Marine Corps, so it's kind of a kindred spirit. So it's awesome to be able to have conversations like this because there's so many important things going on in the world. And for me, seeing the work that you do and understanding what you guys are a part of, it's great to know there are other people out there who are in these arenas really seeking to make a difference. And so I appreciate what you do and what you certainly at the college and in your life and through church and as a father. And so many of these issues, I think people just don't understand. And education is one of the big ones. Obviously, we're in a place in time where education is constantly in the news. It's constantly in the forefront of every conversation, even around gender and all these other crazy things we're involved in.
Yeah.
And for Christian people, I feel like we sometimes struggle to even nail down what education should be and how we should understand it and how we should teach our kids and help our kids in this current cultural environment. And so just wanted to have a conversation with you about that because there's so many people trying to understand it, and you do. Maybe we can start with a little bit of your background. I know a lot of people who are listening would know your background, but talk a little bit about your educational background. You've written, I think, 30 books or something like that. You run a college. You have a high level of education. Can you talk about that a little bit? And then we'll talk about the perspectives on education right now.
Yeah. My book output is a little bit more modest, but just a few.
It seems like a lot.
I write and speak a lot, but I haven't published too many. I hope to in the coming years to put my hand more towards writing. Is something I feel like I need to be getting done. But yeah, my education background is pretty diverse and a little bit ADD, I suppose. I started early on. I can't remember if I mentioned this last time, but I think actually Saddam Hussein saved my academic career. I was a reservist in a Marine Corps tank unit, and when I went to college, I was just your typical evangelical kid who not very serious about my faith and also not very serious about academics. So I was a total lazy bum and was flunking out of most of my classes when the Gulf War hit and I was activated. So I got to go to all my instructors and say, you can't activate me because I'm, or you can't fail me because I'm going to, protect your freedom. And then I had my orders canceled because that war was over, faster than than people got there. So I got out of a number of failures. I got extra time to sort of slowly figure out how to be a student. But when I did figure out how to be a student, my initial undergraduate degree was chemistry education. I was very much a science guy. Really believed that if it wasn't numbers and formulas, it wasn't real knowledge. But as I became more serious about my faith, I really came to a very different understanding that, and a very different appreciation of the liberal arts and the way they can equip you to think critically, but also the way they can be used to disciple the Christian faith. And so after graduating from University of Idaho in chemistry, I went on to actually do a master's in English Lit. And then as I became serious about teaching, I did a second master's in Jewish Studies at Oxford and then a doctorate at Oxford, more Reformation theology. And then I'm about 2/3 of the way through an MBA right now, which I've just been working on the side because I got to figure out how to run business in my current position. So I kind of am addicted to college degrees, I suppose, but which is funny given my initial unglamorous start. That's the background.
But it probably gives you a pretty unique view, I would say, on just kind of like the big overview, right? Sometimes people get so focused on what they care about and what they're doing that they miss the rest of it.
Yeah, I think so. I feel like I've gotten a pretty good big picture understanding of what's going on in higher ed, and as well as I think particularly the various Christian misunderstandings about education. I mean, I encountered that I had to work through it myself early on in coming to an appreciation of liberal arts. And then also in teaching at New St. Andrews, we're a college that only offers one degree that is not vocationally specific, one degree in liberal arts, just a generalist degree, which a lot of people look at that and go, so what do you do with that? And I spent a lot of my time walking people through like, okay, so what is education supposed to be about? Because unless you understand that, you wouldn't understand why somebody would go to New St. Andrews.
Yeah. I want to get to that toward the end of this conversation. What should education be about? Because I think that's so important and so critical. Even as a parent, I have 4 kids. One is graduating from college. One is, he's been in junior college and done some other things, going into a career. My younger kids looking at college, it has really changed the way I look at education and trying to understand what's the goal? Like, what are we actually trying to do, right? So I want to get there, but let's start with from where you are, kind of the 30,000 foot view of education in America. It kind of depends on which side of the aisle you're on as to your specific opinion, right? It's either it's a complete cesspool infiltrated by the devil, there's nothing good that comes out of it, or it's a mission field, there's an opportunity, there are a lot of good people there. I'm sure the truth is somewhere in the middle, but what's your assessment of education in the United States right now?
Yeah. Well, I probably would say the truth is not in the middle. Is probably even further out and worse than everybody imagines. The state of higher ed is pretty bad. But I would say I think that I do think that there's some fundamental Christian misunderstandings about what's going on in higher ed. One thing that I think is really important to understand is that higher ed now is not what it was, 20, 30 years ago when a lot of us did college. It has a lot of the same elements, and some of the mistakes that are really prominent now were had surfaced back then, but it's grown far worse. And a lot of people think when I send my kid off to college, I'm sending them to the place where I went, and that I'm just saying that place doesn't exist anymore. It's not like that. So you have to be really aware of that. I think that the two things that I would most highlight about what's going on in higher ed, there's probably more than two, but one is the quite obvious kind of woke indoctrination piece that our campuses are increasingly really ideologically aligned, and they don't allow dissent. And that's probably one of the biggest things that is so different, because I can tell people, hey, the campus is hostile to the Christian faith. And people say, well, I remember going to college in the 90s and my professor would make fun of Christianity and I had to stand up for the faith, and it was good for me. And I remember that myself. I remember doing that, but that's not what it is now. Nobody's standing up now because there's no room to stand up to oppose it. Dissent is not tolerated. It's prosecuted, and it's a very different kind of world. So I would say the indoctrination is just really, really strong. But the other piece is the actual educational value has really diminished significantly. The work that it used to take to get a good college degree, what it used to take to get an A or whatever, has been cut in half and cut in half and cut in half so many times that it's increasingly low. And the reason, and there are a few things that have pushed it in that direction, but one of the real big things has been this shift in what is an education about. It's more about getting a piece of paper, becoming vocationally certified for certain skills, which reduces a large, hairy course into a few simple, very simplistic deliverables. And so the complexity, the difficulty, the level at which you used to have to think at is really reduced down quite a lot. I think particularly a lot of the online stuff, I see this where just myself in taking the courses I'm taking, an online course could have 700 students in it with one professor, and the level of interaction you're having on that is just laughable compared to what you would have gotten with the old one instructor with, say, 25 students. It's a very, very different world. And so the kind of critical thinking, whatnot, that's being passed on is really reduced, and you're just learning very basic little formulas and steps that are tested by a 20 question multiple choice online exam, rather than what used to be a much deeper level of like, do you really understand what we've covered this semester? So the rigor of the whole thing has gone way down, while the kind of expectation that you walk in lockstep has gone way up. And then one of the pieces, the other thing that I think really goes with it is this increasing expectation that, okay, so college is supposed to be your entrance into the workforce. You're supposed to have this degree to get this job. And that whole world is increasingly overseen, or at least expected to be overseen by the state. Like that it's the government's job to drive the economy, to pick the jobs that are needed to get you certified and take you there, which means that in this, you've got this really simplistic little test that you've got to get through, and you've got to get through it if you want a job. And the state that is telling you, here are the ideologies you have to conform to, is over all of that. And so we're increasingly creating little cogs that will do whatever, rather than free minds that are actually what a Christian ought to be. So that's the kind of big picture thing that I see.
When you think back to or look at K through 12 schools, so higher education, we have a problem, but it's being fed with our kids that are coming through schools where they're also not being taught how to think and how to process and how to understand. How do you view those schools? Because I think for a lot of parents, that's where we are right now, and we're trying to figure out, all right, there are increasingly alternatives in the secondary education area, but what do I do with my kids now? They're in first, second, third grade. They're in junior high or high school. How do you view, or how do you think about that?
I'd say on that front is actually probably one of the places where I'm most optimistic, simply because I think over the last 40 years, Christians have seen the collapse of the public school system and have really started building the alternatives. And what I have seen, from my perspective, seeing these kids coming out of various K to 12 programs, when I have seen kids coming out of this kind of newly built K to 12 Christian school movement, particularly the classical Christian school movement, classical Christian schools, but then also homeschoolers that are using classical Christian curriculum, classical conversations, or even like online. You get a lot of kind of hybrid online tutorial things where we're homeschooling, but I'm taking this class online, whatever. That movement is, to my mind, the one place where the church over the last generation has made the most ground and has made the most gains. I'm really optimistic when I see the quality of the education of kids coming out of that K to 12 system, as opposed to what's coming out of the government school system. The real difficulty is there's very few colleges that are actually sufficient to take what they did at that K to 12 level and then take it to the next level. So what I see is a lot of kids coming out of the classical school movement, and basically they go to college, and the first 2 years at the very least are entirely remedial. Like they could jump right into a junior class in most colleges and would not miss a beat. And some of them, even that's still a little bit remedial, because there's just such a huge difference in what's going on in these two different educational systems. So because of that, that's why I say I'm just really optimistic about what we're doing, but we have a long way to go.
There are generally, in my experience, kind of two arguments that Christian parents make for sending their kids to public schools. And, I'm not here to beat up on public schools. I know Christian teachers, and I think there are some good people who are trying. But as a parent, I think, I've always said my job is to watch out for my kids. That's my job, right? And what other people want to do is up to them.
Yeah.
But typically the two arguments that I encounter are, number one, well, as a Christian, we've been called to carry the gospel forward, and the public school system is a good mission field. People use that word, mission field. And my kids can go there and be a light, right? So that's one argument that people make for it. The other argument is, I would love to send my kids to a Christian school, but I don't have the money, or I'd love to homeschool, but I don't have the time. I need to work. How do you deal with some of those things? Again, one of the reasons I like you too, Ben, and one of the reasons I enjoy talking to you is you have such an even view of these things, and you handle them so well. I think because you've dealt with real people and real parents who are really struggling through this stuff, right? Yeah. And so there are answers, but sometimes it's so caustic when we try to answer that we don't do a good job. So how do you address these things?
It's a bit of a minefield to walk through. I get that. And so, that argument about being a light in the public school system, there's some truth there. And it's the reason why I would not beat up on a Christian who was teaching in a public school system. I have a real problem with the public school system, with sending your kids there. Sure. I don't have the same objection to somebody who says, I want to go and serve there because I feel like I can reach out and whatnot. If somebody is a Christian who feels called to be there as a witness, and they are actually able to make a difference with their witness there, they don't have to keep it quiet, they don't whatever, then I'd say God bless them. That's wonderful if you're able to actually go there. But my kids aren't missionaries, and your kids aren't missionaries. Yeah. And I think good. When we say I want them to go there to be light, I would just say, well, let's just take a step back and ask, what's the scoreboard look like? How many public schools have we had Christian students attend and transform that public school into a Christian atmosphere? Sure. Versus how many public Christians have gone to a public school and become unbelievers themselves. And the evidence is so weighted in one direction. And I would say your kids are not missionaries. Your kids are the mission field. They're the ones you're supposed to be working on and raising them to be Christians. They should be the mission field that you're focused on, not the ones that you just send off. I think that if we really truly were serious about that, boy, we would be taking a very different approach with our kids. I think that's kind of a flippant thing to say to excuse your conscience when you send them off.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And I think on that second
Yeah.
question,
That's good.
then, okay, so you've got the light question, then you've got the cost. I get that. I understand that. And as somebody who's put 5 kids through a classical Christian school and now 5 kids through a school like NSA, you know, we made sacrifices to do it. One of the things we did is we got jobs as teachers at these schools in order to get them through. It pays less, but to us, it was worth it to be just a part of these kids' lives and make sure they get an education that disciples them. I would probably, if somebody says, look, and it's the cost that we can't figure, I would walk through that argument and press them a little bit, because a lot of times what it is if I was to do that, I would not be able to continue with the same standard of living that I currently have. And that's different than saying I can't afford it. And I think you might need to think about what are the sacrifices you need to make in order to pull this off. One of the sacrifices might be you live in an area where the schools all have, I hear about schools where the tuition for their kids is $20,000 a year or something like that at a K to 12.
Right.
Like that's more than tuition at New St. Andrews costs. And I think that's crazy. I mean, that's wonderful that some people can pull that off. I never would have been able to.
Sure.
I would say find a place where you can afford and move, make that a priority. And if it's not possible, then there are so many great homeschooling opportunities that, and it's not like when we first moved to England, when I was doing my doctorate, we homeschooled our kids for the 3 years that we were there. And man, we were hopeless homeschooling parents. We were like, we did not have a clue what was going on. But since that time, what I have seen is the resources to help bewildered parents become competent homeschoolers are so numerous that you're really without excuse. And so what happens is the problem tends to be, well, it's not that, we could homeschool, but it would mean we would have to be a single income family rather than a dual income family. And we're not willing to make that sacrifice. And again, that just takes you back to the earlier thing of like, I think you're prioritizing the wrong things. Maybe you need to move somewhere where the standard of living, the cost of living is a little bit lower. Maybe you need to just, rethink your vacation schedule, how many cars you need, all of those things. And you'll make some sacrifices. But I would say, for me, having a family that is joyful in fellowship with one another, following in our footsteps, loving the Lord, living the life that we want them to live, that is worth so many vacations. And,
Sure.
I can remember this was, years ago, our school where our kids would go, they changed spring break from 1 week to 2 weeks. And the impact of that was hilarious, because out of nowhere, all of a sudden you got a 2 week spring break and people were like, we're going to Acapulco, we're going to, Europe, and you had all these crazy vacations. And it was like this big flex on who had the wildest vacation. And then there were some of us who were like, our vacation is like letting the kids sleep on the trampoline, like that. And you just kind of have to suck it up and say, like, this is our means. This is, what we can have. But I can tell you that 2 week vacation with kids that love you is just worth so much more. I mean, even if you're only sleeping on the trampoline, it's awesome. It's worth a sacrifice.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think so many parents have, for so long, had priorities, as you just mentioned, upside down. My career is my priority, and then I'll do what I can with the kids, or where we live is a priority, and then we'll figure out what to do with the kids, when really God called us as parents to be responsible for training our children to go out into the world, right? And it is funny that a parent would send a child to a place and use the kind of statement, I want them to be a missionary. Well, really, we are to train our kids to go up and go out into the world, but there is a process connected to that. Yeah, that's great. Do you feel like the events of the last couple of years have helped to awaken parents to the need to focus on their kids' education? I feel in my spirit like a lot of parents have finally woken up and went, oh boy, we need
Yeah.
to do something different here. Have you seen that or experienced that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think what we've seen, I mean, we're kind of exploding in enrollment here, and I think it's just the trickle down of what's already been happening at the K to 12 level, where this, I said that the schools that your kids are at now are not the school you grew up at. I think 5 years ago,
Yeah.
a lot of us still
Yeah.
thought that, and then
Sure.
basically over the last few years, all of a sudden our eyes were open and we saw, oh my word, that is not the school I remember. This is
Yeah.
completely different. And it's drastic and it's terrifying. We got to do something and do something now.
Yeah, it's good. Again, as difficult as everything is, I was talking to someone at our church last week, and we were talking about some of the cultural stuff that's happening, and they have small kids. And the mom said to me, well, where's the hope in that? That's a good question. And I said, well, the hope is we are not fooled anymore into believing that everything's okay. It's not okay. And
Yeah.
now we know that, so we can take real steps to help our kids grow up. And
Yeah.
I feel
Well,
like that is,
I think that's a really good point, though. That where's the hope? Because what I want to point out is that we're not. I'm not. We're not trying to be like reclusive preppers, where we're
right.
grabbing our kids, moving out to the woods with a lot of beans and
Right,
rice and
right.
whatever.
Right.
What we're
Right.
doing is we're building new. We're building a whole culture, and what I see is so much opportunity in front of us to rebuild everything that has been broken down and desolate. Like when I see the fact that these schools that we're competing with perform at this level and we're performing at this level, I think, man, how much scope for our future? How far can we go? How much
Yeah.
will these kids be able to dominate as they grow, build, start their own families and companies and whatnot? So to me, I'm just really optimistic about what we see in the future.
Yeah, that's good. When we think about post-high school education, this is a question that has come up in my house, hundreds of times over dinner as we're talking about the kids' future and what they're going to do and where they should go to school. And I'm really thankful to people speaking into my life on this, right? Because when
Yeah.
I was growing up, you go to college, that's what you do, and then you go from there. And a lot of that has changed. And even with my four children, everyone's different. They have different, God has bent them differently, and so we want to figure out what works for them and where it works. But how should parents think about post high school education when they're thinking about that for their kids? What should they be either thinking about? This is where we're going to send our kids, or this is what we want from a college or a university,
Yeah.
or even maybe that's not what needs to happen for this particular child. How should parents think about that?
Well, I think that last point is important. I think the importance of a college education has been really inflated, and I think it's. I mean, as a college president, I know I'm not supposed to say that.
Yeah.
But
right.
I think that everybody's having their eyes opened. That we're trying to pretend like this degree is necessary to get that job, and then there's just so much common sense evidence to destroy that myth. It's just not the case.
Sure.
So I would say calm down on the stress about going to the right college, getting the right degree. God has a way of working these things out. And the idea that an 18-year-old can have the kind of foresight to know the exact diploma that they need for that career that's going to last them for 40 years is ridiculous. We all transition and shift in all kinds of different directions.
Yeah.
We move laterally now far more than we move vertically and changing fields and whatnot. So I would just calm down about the stress about getting the right degree. I would think in terms about where are you going to become the kind of person that you want to become? I think it's one of the things that NSA is trying to do is we're focusing on graduating a certain kind of person, not these certain vocations. We're not trying to train for these different jobs.
Yeah.
We're trying to train certain kinds of people to be a certain way. And God has a way of giving them the jobs they need, and that will work its way out. So I would worry more about the formation of the person. I think that the years 18 to 22 are some of the most significant years. If you just look back on your own life, I ask this question all the time. Look back on the years 18 to 22. Is there any period in your life that had more disproportionate impact on the rest of your life than those years? This initial transition to adulthood is such a formative time for your understanding of the faith, who you are, what you want for a family, who you're going to marry, all that. So I would focus on what's the place that's going to give you the kind of discipleship that you want, the mentorship that will push you and challenge you, but mature you and make you a more faithful Christian. What's that place? What's the healthiest place for that to happen? That's what I would prioritize. With regard to actual specific work and vocation, I'm a big believer in internships, summer jobs, those things that give you a taste of the different kinds of things that you would like to do. That's what I've pushed my kids into, and I think it's helped them to really distill what they are passionate about, what they love most. And to try a whole host of different things and to mix it with their college studies. So they're getting a degree that helps them to be a certain kind of person, and they're getting practical experience in the career field itself, rather than by professors who are distant from those careers.
And then for a career that requires a certain type of education, that would be post that. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that you want to make sure that there are a lot of people will say you need this degree for that job. I think it's worth going out and finding people from that job. Like, how highly do you value this degree? So, for instance, I'll notice that computer engineering, people who are in the computer engineering industry tend to think pretty low about the actual computer engineering degrees. They don't think that actually provides you what you need here. Now, there are others, chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, you got to have that certification if you want to get in. Nursing, you have to have that certificate if you want to get in. So I would just make sure you do the work to know whether it's necessary or not. But there are some careers where, you have to have that degree. I also think one of the things that's kind of funny is I noticed this. There are certain kids who, like at 7 years old, have a spiritual moment where God tells them exactly what they're going to be when they grow up. Right. There's like 10% of us that get that news when we're little kids, and they know without a doubt exactly what they're going to be. They tend to be doctors, or medical industry or engineers. And weirdly, those tend to be the degrees that require, or the careers that require very specific degrees.
Interesting.
And those seem to work well. But I would say there's 80 to 90% of us that are clueless about what we're going to be. Even maybe 5 years after graduation from college, we're still not totally convinced that this is the right spot for us. And we continue to develop over life. That's more the norm. And so I see people for whom it's like this, and it's great if it's like that for you. Most of us are going to move all over the place, and that's not a problem. It's not weird.
Yeah, that's good. My daughter's graduating from a college here, private college here in our area, with an accounting degree. She wants to be an accountant, but she spent 3 years going to junior college, living at home, working with our church, going through that process before she figured that out. And that was a big conversation we had on the front end, is before we're going to nail you down to this thing, why don't you figure out what you want to do? And man, it's been such a blessing. She's been home. We've had so many incredible conversations. She's grown as a person and matured, and then got to the point where she could spend 2 years doing what she had to do to get into the career that she believes God's called her to.
That's great.
And some parents, man, are just so afraid to, I don't know what it is. I don't know if they're afraid that God's not going to show their kids what to do, or what the challenge is there.
There is a real, we define ourselves by our careers. We define our success by our career, and we are terrified for our kids that they will not be able to move into faithful vocation. And I see that with my sons. I really want them to do well, but I also know how it played out for me, that it took me a long time to really understand what I wanted to do. And no amount of pressure from my parents would have made that easier.
Right.
I just think it's something they have to go through themselves. The joke I tell is like, or anecdote. I travel a lot, and I'll show up to a church to speak. And when after church, somebody will say, "Hey, you're coming to our house for lunch," and it's invariably, if it's a guy who's like 55 or 60, he'll want to give me directions. Like, here's how you get to our house.
Right.
And they'll be like, you're going to go out I-5, there'll be a billboard and an exit. And then and the whole time I'm like, I got your address on my phone. I'm good.
I'll be okay.
And I'll hold it like, I'm good. And they're like, yeah, okay, that's right. But there'll be a Home Depot, and you're going to want
right.
And it's so funny because like 20 years ago, this guy would have been useful, but his information is no longer helpful. And he just can't get over the fact that because he spent a whole lifetime of learning how to give directions. And I think that as parents, we're often like that. Like, we have so many directions that we want to give, but it's like, they got to kind of figure it out themselves. And there's no amount of directions I can give that's going to take away from them the moment that they need, where they just figure it out themselves.
That's good, man. That's great. Dr. Merkle, where can people learn about either New St. Andrews College or you and the other resources that you've written and are providing?
Yeah, definitely check out.
You do travel a lot.
nsa.edu to see our webpage. And if you click on the top, there's a thing for the blog. And on that blog, I've been writing a lot about the kinds of things I'm talking about. So I would definitely hit that blog for a lot more information. And you can also sign up there for our newsletter and get more of a sense of what we're about and what we're doing.
That's awesome. Man, I really appreciate you and your position on this. It's so helpful for me to talk to you about these issues because you have such a clear mind on it. It's hard sometimes talking to other Christian people who have strong opinions about things like education because they just want to hit you in the face with a baseball bat. Like we're real people that, and parents are real people really struggling through some of this stuff. And we feel bad because of how culture's going. We love our kids. We want what's best for them. We're trying to balance a home budget and figure out our own careers and our own stuff. These are real issues. And I really, really do appreciate just your perspective on it and your clarity. Yeah.
Appreciate the chance to be on here.
Man, thank you. And hope we'll talk again.
All right. Take it easy.
Just when you thought it couldn't get any better, Mike Lindell with MyPillow is launching the MyPillow 2.0. When Mike invented MyPillow, it had everything you could ever want in a pillow. Now, nearly 20 years later, he discovered a new technology that makes it even better. The MyPillow 2.0 has the patented adjustable fill of the original MyPillow, and now with a brand new fabric that is made with a temperature regulating thread. The MyPillow 2.0 is the softest, smoothest, and coolest pillow you'll ever own. For our exclusive listeners, the MyPillow 2.0 is buy one, get one free offer with promo code SITREP. MyPillow 2.0 temperature regulating technology is 100% made in the USA and comes with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee. Just go to mypillow.com and click on the radio listener square to buy the one, get one free offer. Enter promo code SITREP or call 800-870-0283 to get your MyPillow 2.0 now. We were not made to live in isolation. Sadly, many of our veterans feel they need to fight their battles alone. This self-isolation has led to the staggering statistic of more than 20 veterans taking their lives every day.
A lot of guys end up drinking, a lot of guys end up losing hope. Someone will go to the VA and they'll try to get, prescription medications to help with PTSD. They'll get pills for anxiety, they'll get pills because they can't sleep. Now they'll get pills for depression before they know it. They're taking 12 different medications. And when it's not working out, these guys lose hope. And that's why there's 23 guys a day committing suicide.
The mission of Mighty Oaks is to eradicate the veteran suicide epidemic and help our warriors change their legacies. As a result, we've been able to help over 4,000 veterans and first responders by equipping them with the tools they need to live the lives they were created to live.
Everything they said just kept hitting me in the heart over and over and over again. It's like all the things that I didn't know that I needed to hear. And I opened my heart to God that week, dude, and I've been a different person ever since.
Our faith-based, peer-to-peer approach has one of the highest success rates of any program available today, offering hope and understanding to those who need it most. We provide our programs and resources, including travel, at no cost to our warriors.
I remember talking to a licensed social worker who actually handed me a pamphlet to Mighty Oaks. So I went. And I'm glad I did.
By aligning their lives to biblical principles, these men and women are able to lead their families, their communities, and our nation. Our mission is to serve and restore our nation's warriors and families who have endured hardship through their service to America, and to help them find new life purpose through hope in Christ. It's your generosity that can make a difference in the lives of the men and women who have fought for our country and our freedoms. Now that they're home, don't let them fight alone. Learn more at mightyoaksprograms.org. I appreciate Dr. Merkle and his perspective, as I mentioned at the top of the show, during the interview, and here again. I am so thankful for his approach, his view, his clarity. And when we talk about getting the information we need, as well as the perspectives we need, he provides both in this very critical area. And I would just say, as a parent, as a grandparent, if you influence young people, that could be really young people, maybe young adults, take that responsibility seriously. There are few things that should have a place of priority over educating your kids. So please seriously go and check out the new St. Andrew's website. You can find the blog there as well, as Dr. Merkle mentioned. So appreciate that. Thank you for that. If you are listening and have not yet subscribed to this podcast, wherever you're listening from, hit whatever button you have on your platform. Maybe it says follow, maybe it says subscribe. Whatever it says, go ahead and do that right now. That would be fantastic. That will let you know as soon as a new episode is pushed out a couple of different times a week. So we'd love for you to join us there. And then take some time when you have the opportunity, go to thesitrep.org. thesitrep.org. You can find all of the links to information about the show, old episodes, our archive, places that you can sign up, even for a newsletter that keeps you informed of what's going on. We'd love to have you join us there at thesitrep.org. Thank you again for joining the show today. Look forward to talking to you next time.